Ladies and gentlemen, it's crunch time. I'm Jefferson Penrod. The clock is running, so let's go to work. I'm excited to be back. Haven't done an episode in way too long. The setup's a little bit different. I don't know if you can tell. I also have a second camera, so not sure how much I'm going to be cutting to that. Editing me will figure that out. But I'm just here having fun. The whole point of me doing this is just to have fun. So don't take anything I say seriously. In other words, if I'm wrong, just remember I'm a college kid and I don't actually know what I'm talking about. But that's beside the point. This is my BYU football season preview. We're about a week and a half away from the BYU football season kicking off. And so to go through the season, I want to talk about a couple of things that I think BYU can rely on, a couple of question marks that BYU has, and then I want to briefly go through the schedule and give my win-loss prediction for the season. First of all, a couple of things that BYU can rely on. The first thing is the run game. Obviously, this was the bread and butter last year, and a major reason why BYU was as successful as they were. LJ Martin rushed for over 1,300 yards, averaged 5.5 yards a carry, 12 touchdowns, and averaged 100 yards per game. Very prolific on the ground, and was BYU's best offensive player the whole season. BYU gets him back for his senior season before going to the NFL, where I'm sure he will be a great player as well. So BYU needs to do what they can to focus on LJ, highlight him, and the run game is an extension of that BYU's run game will be successful when LJ Martin is successful as well. Bear Bachmeier was also a big part of the running game. It's never a bad thing to have a quarterback that can run, as long as he can throw too, which Bear can. But getting Bear Bachmeier in his sophomore season, when he's going to have more poise, understand the flow of the game better, understand the offense better, I think bodes well for him, not just as a passer, which we'll talk about later, but as a runner as well. He's going to know the opportunities he should take advantage of to run the ball and maybe see things better on designed runs. So, good news for BYU that Bear Bachmeier is back as well. And another big thing with the running game, Sione Moa is back. If you had to pick a weakness of BYU's run game last year, it was the lack of a true secondary running back. And hopefully Sione Moa, after dealing with a lot of injury issues, scary injury issues last year, hopefully he can bring that. Again, you don't need him to be a 1,000-yard rusher. I mean, if he is, that'd be great. But BYU needs at least someone that is, when they're in the game, poses a real threat to defenses to be able to get 3, 4, 5 yards a carry. The second thing that I think BYU has the ability to rely on is the personnel on the defensive side of the ball. Most starters from the defensive side of the ball are back, including both corners, Trey Alexander and Evan Johnson, and adding Cade Uluwave alongside Isaiah Glasker and Siale Acera in the linebacker room is super big. So the defensive personnel, whether it's returning starters or additions, is very, very strong. So my questions on the defensive side of the ball are stem not from the players. So they're not about the ability of the players to do their job, but more so from the scheme. And we'll get there in a minute. But I feel very good about the defensive personnel that BYU has, especially when last year the defense was such a big part of the game. And lastly, a thing that BYU can rely on is the momentum that they're building as a program. Now, I have to be cautious because every BYU fan listening to this knows that the highs that we ride as fans often crash when we least expect it. Okay, there's been many documented examples just in my lifetime, in the last 20 years or so, where that's happened, and I'm sure if you go back, the same thing happened as well. You need to be cautiously optimistic with the momentum that BYU is building, but there is that optimistic part. This season feels like a season that the team and the program have been building towards over the last couple of years. Again, BYU is 23-4 over the last 2 years and just narrowly missed the playoffs both of the last couple of years. And many of the players on this team have been part of that whole time span, part of the last 2 years and this season. And so this feels like something that a team is building towards. Now, again, this has the potential to backfire. If you have questions about that, rat poison, look up Nick Saban talking about it, right? But I trust Kalani, and I trust the guys that are in the locker room building the culture to keep the blinders on, but let the momentum, the positive effects of the momentum that the team is building, continue to go forward. Okay, now let's go to a couple question marks I have about this year's team. The first question mark, and probably the most obvious question mark if you ask around, is the pass catchers. Now, I say this not because I think that the BYU passing attack is going to be bad. I actually think it'll be pretty good. And it has a chance to be better than it was last year due to Bear Bachmeier taking the next step. However, most of the receivers are unproven, at least in a BYU football uniform. Now, tight end position looking very good. You have Walker Lyons and Roger Saliapaga, the two transfers from USC and Oregon respectively, coming in to the tight end room. I think that bodes very well for the tight end position, a position that I think BYU has underutilized over the last couple of years, but that's a conversation for another day. But tight end's looking very good, even if they haven't necessarily played well in a BYU uniform or played in a BYU uniform. I think the tight end group has shown that they can produce at the collegiate level. Wide receivers where things get a little tricky. JoJo Phillips, who I think is still very good, is probably the leading receiver that returns with somewhat a lot of production. But remember, Phillips was hurt for a lot of last year. So can he bounce back and get to his form that he was at 2 seasons ago and even exceed that? Because even 2 seasons ago when he was playing well, he wasn't the number one guy. So can JoJo Phillips continue to progress? And then you've got names like Tanakua, Tiger Bachmeier, Reggie Frischnick, who I think has a chance to have a breakout season, Trey Roberts, Legend Glasker, the freshman out of Lehigh, who a lot of people coming out of camp are super high on. Just a couple names to look out on. So again, I'm not saying that BYU necessarily, that the receiving is going to be a weakness of this team, but it's just something that's unproven. That's a little bit of a difference. Remember, this is not a weakness, it's a question mark. And I hope for BYU's sake that question can get answered. The next question mark I have relates to the defensive scheme. Obviously, the big departure this season was Jay Hill going to Michigan following Kyle Whittingham, and Kelly Poppinga replacing him as the defensive coordinator. Again, the defense was a massive strength of BYU last season. And although the players played well, I'm not taking anything away from the players. A large part of BYU's success on the defensive side of the ball came from the scheme that was run, particularly the way that Jay Hill could confuse offenses, not let them know what was coming, and just overall play the chess match the way that it should have been played. And again, this is a question mark. This is not a criticism. Kelly Poppinga hasn't been a defensive coordinator at the Power 4 level yet. And again, he was also part of the staff. He was a position coach. He was the special teams coordinator, but he also was a position coach that worked with the defense. So my question is, again, this is a question. First of all, how similar will the defense look? Will it look similar to what Jay Hill was running, or will it be something completely different? And if it's similar, how effective will Kelly Poppinga be in playing that chess match? And if it's different, if it strays from what Jay Hill was running, how comfortable will the defense be with it? I think a big strength of the team not only was the scheme, but how comfortable the players felt in that scheme. And so the question is, with just one offseason to kind of learn this new defense, if it is that new, how comfortable will the players be in this new scheme? So again, not saying it's a weakness, but a question mark and something to look out for. And lastly, question mark wise, we come to this. Can BYU get over the hump? It's a simple question. The Cougars, although they have been highly ranked the last 2 years towards the end of the season, have missed the playoff in the last 2 years. And although it's true there are some arguments about whether or not they should have missed the playoffs, and some arguments have more merit than others. I'm not here to reopen those discussions from the last 2 years. The point is that BYU controlled their own destiny in both years, and yet were unable to get it done. Remember, one of the big reasons that BYU wanted to be part of a Power 4 conference is because it gives us security. It gives the Cougars security for being able to make the college football playoff. You just win your conference and you're in. And so despite the fact that BYU has been close, they've made mistakes and it's cost them a spot in the playoffs. So the question is, will BYU be able to get over the hump this year? Now, by and large, it's a favorable schedule, generally speaking, especially in conference play. And we'll go through the schedule here. The problem is not the schedule. It's not a particularly hard schedule. So once again, BYU controls their own destiny. At some point, the Cougars are just going to have to do it. They're just going to have to make it and not leave any room for these debates or discussions that we've had over the last 2 years. BYU needs to convincingly, in the eyes of the committee and the country at large, be a playoff team. And again, we can have these arguments, and I, in some ways, think that they're true. In some ways, maybe I don't. But the bottom line is BYU needs to be in a position where, A, we don't have to have the argument because they won the conference, or B, if they don't win the conference, the rest of their resume is so convincing that there isn't an argument. So again, BYU at some point is going to just need to get over the hump. And when we talk about how the program and the team have been building over the last 2 years, this seems like a year that's built for them to be able to do it. Again, a lot of returning production, over 60% of the snaps come back. And that's skewed a little bit towards the defensive side of the ball as well. Defense brings a lot back, great additions on both sides of the ball. Plus the returners that you have. This seems like a year, if BYU's going to do it, it seems like this is the year to do it. So can they get over the hump and get to the college football playoff? Because again, once you get there, it's not quite like March Madness, but anything can happen. If BYU is good enough to convincingly get to the playoff, they're good enough to hang with just about any team that's out there. So can they do it? Again, question mark. I think BYU has a shot. And again, I think this is the best shot they've had over the last 3 years. But time and time again, BYU shot themselves in the foot and given it away. When they controlled their own destiny, they put it in the hands of other people. And Kalani's repeatedly said, I don't want to do that. So that's the question. Okay, let's look at the schedule now for the Cougars. I mentioned it is a little bit of a favorable schedule. There are some games that I think you can comfortably say BYU is going to win. Some games that are question marks. Let's talk about it. Opening in week 1, hosting Utah Tech. Again, if BYU has issues this game, there's going to be issues all season. I feel pretty confident and comfortable calling that a win for BYU. And again, if it's even a little bit close, it's going to be a long season. Then week 2, a day game hosting Arizona, early conference game. And again, this is where it gets interesting. We don't quite know how most of these teams are going to look. I still feel like BYU is a better team than Arizona. Remember last year it was a little bit of a weird year. But I feel confident in BYU getting that win over Arizona. Week 3 at Colorado State. Again, it's the biannual travel to a G6 team, and I think BYU is going to get that done. It was Wyoming 2 years ago. This year it's Colorado State, and I think BYU gets it done here. Then a bye week, and then at TCU. Now, again, we don't know how TCU is going to look. Remember, Josh Hoover transferred to Indiana, and the new quarterback is Jaden Craig, who was a prolific player at Harvard, but that's FCS, and that's the Ivy League. So when a lot of the strength from TCU came from Josh Hoover, and you have to replace that, especially with someone that's unproven at the FBS level. Again, I could be wrong. I could be eating my words if TCU goes and blows out North Carolina by 60. But then again, they kind of blew out North Carolina at the beginning of last year, and we saw where that ended up. So, to be determined, but I feel good about BYU's chances at TCU. Then the next week, in week 6, if I did my math right? Yes, week 6, BYU, wait, hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, week 7. I didn't do my math right. Week 7, BYU hosts Iowa State on a Friday night, and Iowa State's in a rebuilding year. Just lost Matt Campbell, lost a lot of players to Penn State. And so rebuilding year, I feel confident and comfortable with BYU getting the win there, which leads us to week 8 BYU hosts Notre Dame in one of the biggest games at LaVell Edwards Stadium in decades, one could argue. Going to be one of the most expensive tickets, if not the most expensive get-in price this season in college football. Now listen, the fan in me wants to give this to BYU, and I'm not saying that BYU has no chance, but if Notre Dame is as good as just about everyone in the country thinks they are, then I think BYU is going to have a tough time, even at home, even probably at night, with all the advantages that BYU has there. I think Notre Dame will come out on top in this one. Now again, if I'm wrong, great. I'm not going to be mad about being wrong about this one, but I think Notre Dame will get the win. Then the next week at UCF. Now, UCF was rebuilding. I think they're still kind of in that rebuilding spot with Scott Frost. I think they are going to be better than they were last year, though. And remember, BYU, especially early on in that game last year, struggled. And the point is this. BYU, especially in the Kalani Sitake era, I'm not saying it's necessarily a Kalani problem, because I think a lot of teams struggle with this, but BYU, coming off of emotional games, win or loss, has typically struggled. For example, 2 years ago, after the emotional game beating Utah in Salt Lake City, BYU comes and loses to a sub-500 Kansas team at home. And then the next week, off of the disappointment of that, starts out very flat at Arizona State, and that led to them losing. And those two games are the reason that BYU didn't make the conference championship and presumably the playoff, right? So emotional games, emotional highs are problems for the Cougars coming off of them. So I think BYU is going to get that win, but just something to keep an eye on. That is a bit of a trap game. I don't always like using that term, but if there is a trap game on this schedule, it is that. Then the next week on Halloween, hosting Arizona State. I think Arizona State is going to be better than they were last year, but I still think BYU is going to get it done. And then November 7th, BYU goes up to Rice-Eccles Stadium to play the University of Utah. And I was talking about the fan in me versus the analyst or whatever, but the fan in me is going to win on this one, and I can't, in good conscience, pick Utah to beat BYU. So BYU gets it done there. Then the next week, hosting Baylor. Baylor is rebuilding. They could be good. DJ Lagway, the transfer from Florida, who didn't have a good year last year at Florida, but maybe he takes a step up. I still like BYU in that one. At Kansas, again, Kansas is still rebuilding, trying to revitalize that program. I think BYU wins. And then the last game, hosting Cincinnati. And Cincinnati, without Brendan Sorsby and a couple other guys, I think BYU will get it done. So, all that being said, I know that was a lot of me saying, BYU is going to beat them. But I do think BYU is that good of a team. And I think in some ways, BYU fans can expect BYU to win games that they should win. Right? That's sometimes been a trepidatious thing over the last 10, 15 years, and it hasn't always worked. But I think at this point, the way the program is, BYU fans should expect BYU to win games that they should win. Now, again, are there some tough games on there? Notre Dame's obviously tough. Utah's always tough. Maybe Arizona State's better than they expect to be. But, again, it's a pretty favorable conference schedule. So I feel confident with saying BYU is going to go 11-1. That's my prediction. I'm not going to go any further than that, try and figure out Big 12 championship, playoff, anything like that. But regular season, I feel confident with picking BYU to go 11-1 and 9-0 in conference play. So that is my BYU football season preview. Again, a lot of questions that we have, some questions we feel like we have the answers to, but it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Bottom line is, I just can't wait for football to actually start up again. Week 0, this coming weekend, and then the college football season in earnest comes after that. So, should be fun. I can't wait. I mean, football is, because I go back and forth on, is football, do I like football more, basketball more? And that can be a whole debate. I kind of debate that internally all the time, but it's just like, there's nothing better than football season. It just feels special time in the air, especially if you're in a college town when the team's good. Like, There's just nothing like it. So I'm excited for football season to be back, and hopefully, as the fan part of me, the analyst part's gone for now. The fan part of me hopes that BYU wins every game by 40, obviously, but hopes that BYU does good and is just a fun team to watch. And I do think they will be a fun team to watch. I think the watchability, if that's something that you can quantify, is something that is high. Should be fun. If you like offense, if you like defense, no matter what, BYU should be a fun team to watch. So, thank you so much for watching this. My watchability is probably a little lower than BYU's, but that's fine. Thank you for watching or listening, however you may be doing so. If you're on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're on podcasts, make sure you're following. And until then, we'll see you next time.